In 1975, Lionel Russell and 3 companions went into the central North Island bush. Lionel mysteriously vanished and has never been seen since.
I just kept thinking all the time that he'd come home. And he just never turned up.
That summer, 25-year-old Lionel Russell had separated from his wife and child, so it was possible he'd chosen to disappear. It's equally possible he had an accident in the harsh terrain.
I didn't think that it would be the last time that I would see him. He didn't give me any indication that it was going to be the last time.
Then the rumours started floating around the town that something more sinister had happened.
I got a very sad story that he was chained up to a tree in the bush for 4 days and he was shot in the back of the head.
A story like this attracts plenty of legends. Sitting around a public bar or having a beer talking, the stories can grow.
So why was Lionel Russell in the bush, and what did happen to him? It turns out that the only clues to his disappearance rest with the memories of one of the last people to see Lionel alive, a young child. When Lionel Russell and 3 others, including an 8-year-old boy, went into the North Island bush for the summer of 1975, their express purpose was to grow marijuana commercially and on a grand scale. But something happened that summer, and Lionel Russell was never seen again.
I did spend a lot of time in this specific area, and I loved it. It was more exciting than going to school. And it was an environment I really enjoyed. Yeah, for sure. Lots of freedom and fresh air, and it was great.
To get into the bush, the 4 tramped through the tough terrain for a full day. The area is described as virgin bush.
The country is really steep in there, so one has to be really fit mentally and physically to live down in there. Work in it week after week, month after month.
In an isolated spot, they set up camp and went about planting what they expected to be the biggest ever marijuana crop.
Even the site where they were growing cannabis is extremely difficult to access, which involves a gorge river crossing and a large scramble up the bank. If you were to try and pick some of the better areas within the central North Island, that is a logical and remote area that's not renowned for its hunting, it's not being forested or farmed, that it's the perfect remote area to grow cannabis.
There was a camp built. I remember we killed a wild cattle beast for food one day. Because I'd spent time in there, like every holiday, I knew the area better than the other people I was with. We went in there as it was a dope growing operation, and for that year, marijuana plants were established. The camp was established, and we were there pretty much for the summer. Lionel looked after me on a couple of occasions that I can think of, and was looking out for me, so I've only got a good memory of him.
That was the real early stages of New Zealanders growing cannabis on that commercial scale. The returns they would have got for the time of living in the bush would have been very high.
But Lionel was never to see any of that money. Something occurred in 1975, and he was never seen again. Because of the mountainous, inhospitable terrain, it's quite possible he had an accident in the bush and his body has never been found.
It's steep, it's rugged, a lot of bluffs, gorges. Most of them, if you fall in, you wouldn't get out. straight to the bottom, and no stopping until you hit it either. And if it was a major injury, broken legs or back or hip, head even, they'd struggle to get out of there, really struggle.
If Lionel did meet with an accident, it's unlikely his other 3 companions would have reported him missing because of the reason they were there in the first place. Suicide is another possibility. There are questions over his mental instability. As a youngster, he showed evidence of self-harm, like the time he tried to get out of going to school.
He got me to chop his finger off so he didn't have to go to school. I tried, but I couldn't do it. I missed. So he got angry and he chopped his finger off.
We rushed him up to the hospital and he said, "Oh, Mum, if I had known how sore it was going to be, I wouldn't have done it." But he still had to go to school because they had school lessons in the hospital.
This early and bizarre self-harm behaviour is one clue to fathom the workings of Lionel Russell's mind. To help us understand his personality and motivations, we've brought in renowned international criminologist Wayne Petherick.
What we do in a victimology is try to understand who the victim was and what kind of exposure to harm or loss they had. Given enough warning signs, it is possible to pinpoint somebody who might be a victim early on.
Lionel Russell came from a dysfunctional family background. Born in Tikuiti, Lionel was the 3rd child of 4 and the only boy.
As a child, Lionel was lovable, a real mummy's boy, but a very sad boy.
His parents, Nairi and Sid Russell, separated in 1953 when Lionel was just 4 years of age.
Lionel had a terrible life, moving from one relation to the other one, and now and again I'd get him back, and then my husband and I'd have a bit of an argument and he'd take the children again, and Lionel was fretting all the time for his mother. I do believe that affected Lionel's life completely, you know, all the shuffling around and the hurts that he suffered.
Lionel was caught in the middle of a fierce and ongoing custody battle. Although she tried, Nairi could never protect him in this tug of love.
This night, my brother-in-law said, "Well, you can go to the pictures, I'll look after the kids there in bed." And we went to the pictures, and when I came home I had no children. My brother-in-law had taken them back to their father. When my brother-in-law got home at 1:30 in the morning, and his wife and I were still sitting up waiting for him to come home, because we knew it had happened once we'd seen the children gone. And he said that his brother had offered to pay him £100, and he said, and he didn't even pay me. And I said, well, that was his fault for taking them.
Lionel's younger sister, Charlene, remembers those painful upheavals.
It was always frightening when he was taken away, you know, because it was, how long is it going to be before we see each other again?
Into his teens, the upheavals continued. Lionel was sent away to a series of boarding schools, and contact with his mother was limited to letters.
Lionel grew up with his parents having separated. I think he found connection with his father difficult, particularly through the boarding school phases. When he was in boarding school, he certainly wrote to his mother and kept in touch, certainly a capable letter writer.
When we were only teenagers, he copped a lot. My brother copped a lot. In a lot of ways, he was treated cruelly on some things, but emotionally, my brother probably just wanted stability and security of a family.
He'd been so mixed up as a child. He didn't know where he was. And that affected his life, his mind.
Well, when we look at somebody like Lionel and we see aspects of his childhood that were really quite disruptive, he moved from home to home and was essentially pushed from pillar to post. So that kind of thing would definitely play upon his self-esteem. It would make him feel essentially worthless, that nobody wanted him.
"35 years ago, 4 males, including Lionel Russell, tramped into the unforgiving central North Island bush. Lionel's subsequent disappearance has never been explained. In his early years, there was constant turmoil. He moved 18 times in 20 years. Was this painful childhood a reason for Lionel to take his own life, or had something happened more recently? In an attempt to gain the security he craved, 2 years before his disappearance, Lionel married Josephine.
He wanted to be a good husband. And I mean, he could have had any girl, anywhere, but he chose Josephine and chose to marry her, and I believe that he was a good husband.
Early signs of achieving stability were promising. He and Josephine had a baby boy.
He loved his little boy, he loved his wife, and he was looking to hold on to that family life and security. And that's what he was looking for. And then he got a job in Te Aupōtautua Timber in Paterarū, and he and his wife moved there with a little fella.
He was a very, very good worker. He would go to work, he would provide for his family. He was a good person like that. Work around the house, go to work. He was a good provider in that way.
Lionel wanted me to move down to Paterarū near him. So he arranged for all that. And I went down there to live, and he was as good as gold with his wife. He kept his place absolutely immaculate. The grounds, the outside of the house was washed, and he was always doing things, and he was a leading hand at TT.
For a time, the distractions of work and parenthood kept Lionel busy. But he was also playing hard. His marriage to Josephine was deteriorating, and then around this time too, he began displaying psychological problems.
One evening I said, I think I'll go down to see Boy and Josephine. And when I got down there, I could hear the baby crying his head off, and I rushed inside, and Lionel was attacking his wife. And I tried to get the baby out of the cot, and he threatened me too. So I took off up the road and got my daughter's partner to come down, and I think he knocked Lionel out. And then we got Josephine and the little fella in the car and took them back to their parents. And during the night he came out and he said, "Mum, for God's sake, help me, what have I done?" So I took him that morning. I said, "Okay, come on, we'll go in." And I took him into the doctor, and Lionel offered to go into Tokanui for treatment, and everything was arranged, and I took him over there. And then I went and told Josephine's parents what I'd done.
Lionel Russell spent only a matter of weeks in Tokanui Mental Hospital. He'd hoped that after this time out, he'd return to his family, but when Lionel got home, he was in for a shock.
Just grab the tea.
Josephine was not there, and his wife's parents believed their daughter's marriage was best ended. They raised enough money to buy him out of the family home. Lionel had wished for a reconciliation, so this new rejection was deeply hurtful.
He would have been blown away with losing his wife and being told to leave the premises. And how would that affect a boy that had gone through all that hell as a child? How would it affect him?
For somebody who essentially has a history of broken relationships, this would have been fairly, playing fairly heavily on his mind, and would have constituted just another act of rejection, and it would have impacted fairly heavily on him and his self-esteem.
Would this massive blow to his confidence cause him to do a runner? In the past, conflict had been resolved by moving. Is it possible that Lionel Russell simply up and left New Zealand? Perhaps he wanted to escape his painful domestic situation and headed across the Tasman to Sydney to start a new life. In those days, many Kiwis crossed the Tasman in search of excitement in places like King's Cross. Slipping in and out of each country was easy. There were no records kept, and anyone wanting to lose themselves found Australia in the 70s to be a land of opportunity.
There is obviously an attraction, I guess, if your life has essentially been turned upside down, your relationship's broken down, you've come out of a mental institution, you've got a large amount of money. I guess there would be a certain type of attraction to maybe disappearing and reappearing somewhere else and starting again.
My youngest daughter, she rode to the Salvation Army. The Salvation Army searched in Australia and everywhere, and there was nothing. They came to a dead end.
While he was away from his mother, or while he was separated from his mother, he always wrote to her. He always kept in touch with her and his sister. Now, to just simply up and disappear without any further contact with them would definitely be out of character.
Despite recent family strife, Lionel's sister agrees. Any explanation that involves her brother running away in any sense is just not believable.
He probably had a lot of fearful memories there of his childhood in a lot of ways, so that could have played on his mind, but not to the fact that he would take his own life or he would just disappear with, there's got to be something there that happened why he hasn't returned.
Was there anything outside of his immediate family that gives a clue to his disappearance in 1975? After Lionel finished school, he went to work in the Bennydale Mill. This was a harsh and unforgiving masculine world characterised by heavy drinking, fighting and petty crime.
Lionel as a teenager and as a young man was often in trouble, either within work or particularly with the police. But my view would be that he liked to play. He let alcohol influence him, affected his decision-making and his behaviour.
Alcohol wasn't the only problem. In this macho world, Lionel had a string of sexual encounters and made quite a few enemies along the way.
He liked girls. He liked girls from a young age. Right up until he got old. Yeah. Or older. Yeah. So he was just that type of kid. He was a gorgeous looking kid.
Despite the fact he was now married, he continued to drink heavily, and it got him into trouble.
He would care for his family, but he would be a scrapper. He'd be a scrapper in the pub and stuff like that as he got older.
He must have gone down to Bennydale Hotel and there was fights or something, and I think Lionel did hit a policeman and he was handcuffed. And while the police were seeing to other fights, Lionel got somebody to put him in the car and take him home with his handcuffs on. And he was put into Mount Eden prison.
Although only in jail for 3 months for assaulting the police officer, it was here that the 23-year-old was drawn into plans to enter the marijuana business.
Lionel was quite suggestible and could be encouraged to do things quite easily by someone that he looked up to.
One of those people he looked up to was a fellow Mount Eden inmate. He and another man courted Lionel at a particularly vulnerable time in his life, when his self-esteem was at an all-time low.
That might have the reverse impact of increasing his need for reassurance. So he might be more likely at that time to actually form an affiliation or a bond that might not be that healthy or good for him.
Within a short time of Lionel's release from prison, the friend he'd met in Mount Eden, together with another man, reappeared in his life.
G'day, mate.
Hey, mate.
This was just after Josephine's parents had paid him out of the marriage.
Not much?
The prison mate and mysterious associate had a plan to get rich quick.
Yeah.
In reconnecting with Lionel, they had someone with time on his hands, money in his pocket, and something to prove.
Lionel was easily influenced. He was probably looking for people to connect with. Not surprising that he may well have got into the idea of cultivating cannabis.
Lionel, flush with money, his prison friend and the unidentified third man, along with the 8-year-old, travelled down country together. Two of the team were familiar with the area and knew exactly where they were going. 35 years later, the missing has tracked down the 8-year-old boy who was one of the last people to see Lionel alive. What can he tell us about one of New Zealand's most baffling cold cases? In the summer of 1975, 3 men and a boy camped out in the central North Island bush, growing dope.
There was 4 of us went in there. Besides me, there was Lionel, a mate of Lionel's who I can't remember his name, but he was quite a tall guy. And another guy. It was a beautiful area, lots of wild cows, wild pigs.
It was a tough life. They had to be resourceful and live off the land. As the months dragged on, one of their main jobs was keeping possums away from the marijuana plants.
I had my own slug gun rifle, and of course the possums were the enemy for dope growers. And there was a possum in a tree right at the very end of the camp, in the fork of the tree, and I spent a lot of time shooting the shit out of this possum.
However, long before the marijuana was harvested, Lionel decided to pack it all in. He was sick of living rough, and the demanding terrain severely tested his stamina. Not for the first time, when things got tough, Lionel decided to leave. And only 8 weeks into the 5-month enterprise, he headed back to town. The older man, more familiar with the terrain, escorted the 2 men part way out of the bush that day.
I think Lionel and his friend were maybe there for maybe a couple of months, but then they decided to go back to the city. And I remember Lionel and his friend leaving, so I never saw Lionel. You know, that was the last time I seen him.
We don't know why the third man went too, but we do know that some of them were carrying firearms.
While growing cannabis in the bush, was armed with a shotgun. There was another smaller caliber rifle that was left in the bush with.
I remember hearing maybe an hour after they'd left, I remember hearing 2 gunshots. The next day when returned, I asked, oh, what were the gunshots? And his reply was, oh, I shot some goats.
Despite their big plans, the dope plantation was, we're told, a failure. 3 months after Lionel and the other man had left, the dope grower and his 8-year-old sidekick also quit the camp and returned to civilization. Thereafter, when the 8-year-old boy asked about Lionel, the older man had an explanation.
I think there was times where I may have asked him, "Oh, what happened to Lionel?" And his reply was, "I went to Aussie." So, that was always the reply.
When Lionel Russell was eventually reported missing, the police searched for information on both sides of the Tasman.
Lionel was in trouble with either employers or the police for minor things up until 1975. I don't believe that he had some revelation in the bush, and if he came out alive, never ever got in trouble again. We have his fingerprints. No one with his fingerprints has ever been arrested in New Zealand. With Interpol, I had arranged for a fingerprint search to be carried out. The results came back from that around 1998 with no one with those fingerprints has ever been arrested in Australia. He never has applied for a passport. There's no records of him with work and income. There are no bank records. He never applied for a driver's licence and never has applied for a firearms licence.
I just kept thinking all the time that he'd come home. And he just never turned up. And I had an idea that something bad had happened.
So did something more sinister happen to Lionel Russell on his walk out of the bush? Can the 8-year-old boy, now 43-year-old man, solve the disappearance of Lionel?
There are certain specific spots we should search, definitely. Unless we search, we don't know. It is possible, certainly.
The now grown man and a group of dedicated searchers are going back into the bush to try and locate new clues in the mysterious case of Lionel Russell. "35 years after he went missing, we've teamed up leading experts to examine the area where Lionel Russell was last seen. Was Lionel the victim of foul play? And if so, can his body be found? Or evidence discovered that would identify his killer? The man who was here as an 8-year-old boy, one of the last people to see Lionel alive, and Landsar hope the latest search techniques will reveal new information.
All right, hi guys, thanks for coming in. This afternoon, we're going to head up this ridge up here and then head out towards where we came from this morning. And along that edge, there's 3 bluffs which we're going to be searching. The 3 most likely points. The bluff edges, please be very careful. The ground is fairly loose in and around the place. Once we get to the top, we're going to be concentrating on decision points, toilet stop areas, and any areas where the pathway is quite close to the bluff. Looking at the fall lines, places they might get hung up on the way down. Okay, so equipment that we're looking for out there that these 2 people had are 2 rifles and a backpack with a metal frame.
To date, much focus has been on Lionel's mindset, but little on this unique terrain. In more than 3 decades, the landscape has changed significantly, according to the team's geology expert.
The country is very chopped up. It's steeply incised, and it's because the land is rising and the river is cutting down, and there's sufficient rainfall for rampant erosion in that part of the world. And it is prone to landsliding. It is prone to slope failure. So it's very dramatic, and it's actually quite foreboding to be in that country and feel hemmed in, that hemmed in feeling with steep cliffs and lots of scarring.
With so much time passed, it's unclear just what they're likely to find. But by scouring the terrain, they can analyse the possibilities of what may have happened to Lionel.
Well, in this sort of country, it's an obvious solution of a way to dispose of someone, because physically you can't move someone through a lot of this bush. It's physically impossible. So the logical thing to do is to find a bluff and then drop them off the bluff, never to be seen again. So that's why we're trying that avenue of search.
Hey Pete, I'm just going to stop here, mate. I've got a point of interest I want to have a look at while I'm here.
There's an unusual amount of fauna which could be due to the presence of a decomposed body.
If a body is left at the surface, it will degrade very quickly. In fact, more rapidly than if it were buried. It breaks down, and the reason for that is that the principal agents of decay are rampant at the surface, and they include oxygen, bacteria, natural radiation, and mechanical degradation due to, and that could be animals foraging. So it doesn't take long at all for something to rot completely away if left at the surface.
Okay, Pete, lowering away, mate.
But it's nothing. They have not found human remains.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's Mary.
I don't think you'll find anything of the body whatsoever, but there's a very strong chance that you might find some of his belongings. We know that he had a pack, he had a gun, so he obviously had metal. There's metal associated with him. There may even be remnants of fabric, canvas, maybe rubber if he's wearing boots, maybe some leather even.
The area is prone to slips, it's extremely gorgy, and we've got growth of bush and everything else since 1975. It really is a large area, and it's a needle in a haystack.
I suspect that this is indeed the perfect place, and you could easily get rid of a body in this environment.
The search also tests the 43-year-old's memory. It was 35 years ago, and he was just 8 years old at the time. But he's hoping he can still lead the searchers to the original campsite.
Here's a boot which could be Lionel's. It's going on the sole. You can tell by the age it's been here a long time. And the size, I can't be sure.
Before long, the camp has been located. Amazingly, it's still standing. There's no doubt this is where Lionel and the 3 others spent the summer of 1975.
It's a spade from 35 years ago. And over here is the tree with a fork in it, where I shot the possum with a slug gun rifle.
The dangerous nature of this terrain leaves no question that Lionel could have had an accident and never been found. However, Lionel had created a number of enemies, and a chance meeting that leads to a confession suggests Lionel Russell was murdered. The disappearance of Lionel Russell in the central North Island in 1975 remains one of New Zealand's most intriguing mysteries. Many locals believe that Lionel Russell was murdered.
We look at Lionel's history of being in and out of prison, being in a mental institution, a chronic abuse of alcohol, being in and out of relationships, unstable family relationships. He's got a huge amount of money in his pocket. He's associating with people who are engaged in illicit activities. He's very, very easily manipulated, and also wanting to leave halfway through a criminal enterprise. This is the kind of stuff that does pose a considerable risk to him.
We tracked down a woman who lived with someone connected to the dope-growing venture. To protect her identity, we've used an actress to voice her words. This is her statement.
I'd been living with him for about 3 years. He talked about shooting, what it was like to shoot somebody and watching the light go out in their eyes.
From 93 to 97, in the mid-90s, I realised what had happened, for a whole number of reasons. Things had come together. And one day I received a phone call from in 97. I hadn't seen her for a good 10 years.
Like everyone, he always had his own theory about what happened in the bush when the men left the camp. And to him, this chance meeting confirmed his fears.
We had tea and we were sitting around the kitchen table after a meal. And I said, "You know why I was always so frightened of him?" And he said, "No, why?" And I said, "Because of those guys in the bush." And his eyes just opened up and he said, "Do you know about that?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "How do you know about that?" And I said, "Because he told me."
And I was totally blown away. I already knew, but the fact that he'd actually admitted to somebody, I was pretty surprised.
And he told me the whole story about what had happened when they'd gone up into the bush and how he always believed that Lionel had been done away with. And I took that information to the police.
I was a detective in Awakuni in 1997. They approached the police and I was assigned the file to investigate. With the original conversations that I had and then sitting down with him to get a fairly detailed statement, I'm satisfied that his recollection is accurate. And that his motivations for talking to the police are honest and are true.
These two people are confident they know what happened to Lionel Russell. However, police investigations to date have been hampered by lack of evidence. This has not stopped wild stories circulating around the community, and some of the most hurtful found their way back to Lionel's mother.
I got a very sad story about how he'd disappeared and how he'd been killed. That he was chained up to a tree in the bush for 4 days, and then when they went to let him go, he tried to run and he was shot in the back of the head. And I said, "Well, where is he?" "Oh, well, pigs could have got him. They could have taken him out to the Taranaki Bight and dropped his body overboard." Whether I was being told the truth or not, I knew that Lionel was dead.
Yeah, there was a story that bodies had been dropped at sea with a helicopter, but it was utter crap. So it was just a false trail so that people wouldn't realise or would look somewhere else for the bodies, basically.
We've chased up a number of stories that have simply been that. So-and-so heard from so-and-so, yet as we trace it back, there's no validity or real evidence behind the story they've heard.
There are numerous possibilities for what happened to Lionel Russell. It seems most likely he met with an accident or was the victim of foul play. The identity of the third man who camped in the bush with Lionel remains a complete mystery, as does his whereabouts.
No strong leads on who this person is, and if they were from Australia, fled back there, kept quiet, or any information has never made it to New Zealand police.
We attempted to contact the older man to see if he would shed light on his last sighting of Lionel Russell, but we did not get a response.
His position to the police is that he has had nothing to do with Lionel's disappearance. That's really the extent of his cooperation with us for our inquiry into Lionel. For all I know, there is someone out there that has some strong evidence that would assist not only us in terms of bringing this to a conclusion, but bring it to a conclusion for Lionel's elderly mother, for his sisters, and to be able to solve this once and for all.
Got this little plaque from up north. We decided we're going to go into the bush and put this into the bush where he presumably things have happened in there. So with the stone there, at least it's a memorial to say that he had been. And for me, that brought the closure to say that at least there is something there to say that he was here. But on the other hand, the final closure for me would be if we ever found out what we think and believe that we know of the foul play that happened to him.
I thought that by putting the stone in there would be something for Boy, for Lionel. But I would still like to know the truth about what happened and where he was, and it won't bring him back, but you've got finality,